Well, Larry, again, it's good to see you again. We met previously on the campaign trail, and we really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, interview you in person for Christian Coalition of Alabama.
Well, I'm proud to be here, and I appreciate the help. It's a long road. Anytime you're campaigning for several months and you're going against an incumbent that's been in there quite a while, it's one of those things where any time you can get help and support from folks, that's a good thing. So thank you for having me.
Well, great, great. And the thing that's very interesting, we've just had the Iowa caucuses, and the thing that came out of that, it was very obvious that people, not just in Iowa, across the nation, here in Alabama, are tired of the career politicians that promise everything, do very little. And particularly on the Republican side, we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing very much voter enthusiasm, new voters coming to polls. And some of our own politicians, even Congressman Rogers has been in for quite some time. How are you going to be different? How can we tell the people of Christian Coalition that you're going to be different than some of these career politicians?
Well, every time I've spoken to different groups, I've told them the same thing, and that is you have to take a look at where we started and where we are today. I was a high school athlete. I was the SGA president. A lot of people thought that I was going to go off to be a doctor, a lawyer, an astronaut or something. And instead, I chose to work with students with disabilities. So it kind of shows from the very beginning where my heart was to try to help less fortunate, try to help people that need somebody to want to take care of them. From that point, I became a teacher, a special education teacher. I was a special ed director. I've spent my whole career teaching, coaching, being an administrator of schools in a school district. I've been a superintendent for 11 years. I was the 2010 Alabama Superintendent of the Year. And I've shown a real body of work of what I call leadership and excellence. I've been able to accomplish some things that a lot of administrators have not been able to accomplish. And I think it's because I've been problem solving my whole life and my heart is in the right place. I'm not trying to self-promote, or I'm not trying to go get another career in Washington. What I'm trying to do is help solve some of the problems that have not been able to be solved. And I'm as frustrated as the average American is. Part of the reason I'm doing this is because I've just always been a believer that you pray over something, and if it gets put on your heart, you follow it. My children were just like me. They were very frustrated about some of the things happening. They were worried about their future. I'm worried about turning over a country that has as many problems as it has. And I've always said, if we don't step up, if leaders don't step up, who will? It means we'll then leave it up to everybody else to solve the problem, or anybody to solve it. And then when it doesn't get solved the way we want it to get solved, we then get upset. We then go pray to the Lord that He will fix it. And I think we have to be the ones that take that responsibility and try to do it. The Iowa caucuses, what it did was it said Americans are frustrated. We're scared, and we think that if something doesn't change quick, we're going to be in trouble. And I think that the three leaders that came out on top, the top three, showed that people don't have faith in the incumbents. They don't have faith in the establishment. And so they're just yearning for leadership. They're yearning for somebody from the outside that might bring something different to the table. I certainly can do that. I've never run for an office before, so no one could ever say that I'm part of the establishment and that somehow I'm going to get caught up into that trap. It's a trap, and if you've never been in it, you can fall into it, especially if you have aspirations to make it a career. I don't have those aspirations, so I don't think anybody has to worry about that.
Well, great. Well, one of the things that I think there's a lot of frustration, at least with us, with the Alabama delegation in general, particularly some of the members, there's been no major legislation come out of Alabama. You don't see any sponsoring major legislation. No people going to bat. In fact, one of it, not your particular opponent, but another incumbent, has said that the pro-life issue, for example, is divisive, and they don't want to bring that up. It's like they want to increase their seniority so they get more donations and get back to their key donors, which doesn't serve the public well.
Randy, that's called leadership. It's called leadership. When you step out there on that ledge, when you know it's not popular, when you know it's divisive, that's what leaders do. They show courage. It's not leadership if you're not showing courage and you're not taking that risk. It just means you're basically just going through the motions. And that's what a lot of people do if they are afraid of their shadow, or if they are afraid that somehow they're going to lose that committee assignment, or if they're going to lose favor with the establishment. And I think that's part of the problem, is everybody's just trying to get along. And people are afraid that, well, if they see that I'm not trying to get along, that somehow that I'm just mean-spirited, or I'm just trying to cause gridlock, and I'm not going to get reelected. I think that's why it's so important to have term limits, because when people start making decisions based off what will keep getting them elected, we're in trouble as a nation. We got to have people that go up there and say, I'm going to do what I think is best for our country, for my fellow Americans. And if I get reelected, great. If I don't, that's okay too. We'll let the next guy step up, next lady step up, and see if they can do better.
Well, that's great. And speaking of pro-life and pro-marriage, obviously we in the Christian community have been losing ground there. We elect a Republican supermajority, and yet we can't get major legislation on either marriage front or on the life front forward. Do you see what can we see in you if you happen to be elected as on those particular issues? How can you help those particular issues and those causes that we see that are devastating our families, for example?
Well, anybody that understands what's happening in our communities understands that the primary cause of many of the problems is a deterioration of the family unit. One of the things you got going on right now is married couples get punished when it comes to taxes and those kind of things. Many people have learned how to game the system, and they understand that as long as they stay single and they do certain things, that they'll be able to game the system, get money out of it, get benefits and tax credits and all those things. So there's really no incentive to stay married. I think if we put some things in place, and it's kind of a catch-22, because I don't believe that government should get too involved in our lives. But I think what we certainly shouldn't be doing is enabling people. We shouldn't get them dependent on entitlements. We shouldn't get them dependent on things to where it then hurts the system. It hurts our government, hurts our country. So what we have to do is take away any incentive for the family to break apart. We need to provide incentive for them to stay together. There are many education things we can do to help educate folks to the pros of staying married and keeping that family unit together, because everything suffers, it seems, when the family breaks apart. You see discipline suffering typically, you see academic achievement suffering, not always, but for the most part, the income, for example, of the parents are a direct predictor of success of children academically. Doesn't guarantee it, but it's a predictor. And so you got to have at least people up there first that understands that concept about the importance of family, has demonstrated it in their own lives. I've been married 29 years, got 3 wonderful boys, and understand the value of it. I was raised in a large Italian family. We understood the importance of family. I think there's a whole generation of kids out there that have never been a part of a huge family with a father and a mother there, and they don't understand what they're missing, basically.
Well, the other thing that was a little bit disconcerting to me, and I think many people, was Congressman Rogers, for some unknown reason, came out to defend Speaker Hubbard out of the blue in Auburn. I know you're very familiar with Auburn. We kind of thought that was a strange thing, because to let the justice system play out rather than him play a major role in that. And we were wondering what is your take on things like that?
Obviously, I don't know what's going through his mind or what's going through the speaker's mind. Typically, when that happens, they're either really, really, really good friends, or they kind of owe each other. And I don't know which one that is. But that is unusual and in my opinion, irresponsible for a congressman to publicly stand behind a microphone, behind someone that has been charged with 23 felonies and has publicly criticized our Attorney General, our state Attorney General, unless he's got some information that's factual that we don't know about. But that still shouldn't happen. Maybe after the process runs its course, maybe there'll be an opportunity or something that's more appropriate for a congressman to do that. But for them to do that and question our justice system in Alabama before the cards have even been laid out on the table, I think was irresponsible. That's just my opinion. I certainly wouldn't do that as a congressman. What the other thing that the perspective I'm coming from is from a school district standpoint. If we had a school administrator that a grand jury has leveled some charges against them, the first thing we're going to do is place them on administrative leave. It doesn't mean they're guilty. It just means that we have to do the responsible thing here and remove this distraction. We have to err on the side of caution, and we continue to pay that individual, but we move them aside until the justice system runs its course. I'm just not sure why that hasn't been done here. Right. I think you should do that voluntarily, but if not, there should be a mechanism in place for that to happen. If it's good enough to take place in our school districts, in many of our businesses and other areas of government, then the same thing should happen for our legislators.
Right. Going back to education, one of the things I was intrigued with your experience in education and the tie to economic outcomes. One of the things that we have such a problem with in Alabama is educational excellence and people achieving everything, and that's, as you mentioned, it's tied directly to their economic output. How can you at the congressional level change maybe the culture will or make incentives so there is more better achievement, for example, in our education system, better results with the education dollars that come from Washington to Alabama?
Well, one of the first things I would do is try to get the federal government out of the education business. That surprises a lot of people because I've been in education for 34 years. I think the Department of Education should go away at the federal level. I think the only piece that I would save would be the piece that protects the rights of students with disabilities, because there'll always be a need for that. But you see, a lot of people think that the U.S. Department of Education has been here forever. It hasn't. It came about, it was established when President Carter was president. We sink billions of dollars into a bureaucracy, into buildings, into people up there in Washington, D.C. They then get extremely active in our lives when it comes to education in our country. That's a mistake. In my opinion. Certainly the states, I think, can do a better job. They know best what their citizens need. They know what training requirements. They know what economic issues there are in their state. And part of what they're trying to do is prepare these young men and women for jobs. And we want them to stay in our state. So that's why you do kind of an analysis of what's needed in your state. And then you try to produce those kids that can go right into the workforce and be able to raise their families. So if we can take the federal government out, take that money, send to the states in block grants. I wouldn't put the legislature in charge of that money. I'd send it to our state departments of education. Let them then dole it out in an appropriate way and in an equitable manner, because part of that, you're always going to need some title funds, some federal title funds to help those kids that are growing up in poverty. You've got to have that. But once again, let the federal government give that to the states and let us handle that. The other thing too, because we're going to be cutting out that bureaucracy, that overseer up in Washington, all those buildings, all those people, that money can either be invested into our education system, or we can reduce the deficit down. Either one would be good for our country.
Right. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to pivot a little bit to foreign affairs too. We have a port in Alabama, Mobile Port, that is greatly positioned for economic growth, yet we are 35th in cargo exports and things like that. I've been working with the Department of Agriculture, as you may know, trying to get more exports, but we have a problem with businesses wanting to go to countries to invest and do more work. How can we get more of our Alabama exports out, which will build more jobs, to these different countries? How can we stimulate that?
Well, there's a lot of ways. I think I heard somebody once say that that President Obama's number one export in the United States are our industries. That's a shame. I mean, we've lost so many local industries to foreign countries. We have to take a look at the big picture and say, why are they leaving? I mean, I've got to think that people want to stay in their own country to produce their own goods. It doesn't make sense that someone from here would go to another country to produce goods, then turn around and send them back here. There has to be something that's causing that, whether it's too much regulation, whether they can't find labor cheap enough to be able to produce their goods at a rate that people can afford. So you've got to study that and find out, why is that happening? In the way you do that, you get with those people that have moved and you say, what caused you to move? Put them on committees. Let them tell you, this is what we need to be able to stay and be able to make a living in the country. Whether it's changing the tax structure, whether it is providing incentives, because it's a ripple effect. If we can keep them here, people here will have jobs. People here will then be able to put money back into the economy. It's going to grow our economy if we can keep people here. But even when we have companies come in here and we have a whole bunch of people that we've got employed and they're from Korea, the United States is not the one getting that money. It's leaving our country and going back to Korea or Japan or whatever the company is. So I think we've got to start with studying and figuring out why folks are leaving. And then it's all about what we have done as a government to force them out. And then we got to get out of the way. Let the economic system run its course, and it always takes care of itself. I mean, the only time we ever screw it up is when we get too involved in it, because supply and demand, all those things will take care of itself if we'll get out of the way.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little about immigration too. That's something that's very important to a lot of people here. We've had a lot of problems with immigration. We had this immigration law that was struck down by the courts. The funny thing to me about that whole thing is that many times when there's a solution offered for immigration on both sides of the aisle, it's kind of discarded. It's like they want this issue to continue to be out there in front. And I'll give you one particular example. When the children came across the border from Central America because they thought their children would be safe, and they had a big exodus in 2012.
Right.
I was working with the present government and the governments in Central America to try to get those kids repatriated. One of the ways we were going to do that is have them in a secure place so they wouldn't be taken, like here in Alabama,
Right.
Keep them on a secure board, and then send them back to the missionaries that were willing to take those. Your opponent was against that. So was another congressman. They thought they would get out, and that perplexed me, because if they're going to be an Air Force base, there's nowhere more secure.
Right.
Much more secure than somewhere on the border, where what has happened, these kids have disseminated into the culture. No telling what's happened to them by coyotes and drug traffickers and sex traffickers taking them. What is the problem with the immigration? Why do we have this polarization of immigration? Why can't we have sensible immigration policy that protects us? Okay. And at the same time, we also deal with this other problem with the Syrian refugees. How do we deal with both those type of issues?
I'm gonna make 2 or 3 points. First of all, like I started off with by talking about, there's a real lack of courage and a real lack of integrity going on right now in our country. We have people that are being motivated by the wrong things. Take, for example, when you were talking about you were working with both countries to try to find solutions. You do business in both countries. You're way more familiar with the situation. So if a congressman who can't be an expert in everything comes along and makes a decision that's so contrary to someone who's been there, done that, who is intimately familiar with it, you need to question that person's motives. What did they gain out of doing what they did? What was pushing them to do what they did? If you follow the money, if you follow the lobbyists, if you follow the things that typically happen in Washington, I guarantee you'll find out that there's more to the story that it'll make sense after you know more, but it's not going to be the right thing, I guarantee you. The other thing is, even a plumber understands that you have to turn off the water before you can fix a leaking pipe. But yet, anytime anybody suggests that we close the borders, that we put up a fence, that we slow it down so we can get a handle on it, oh, we're mean-spirited, we just hate immigrants. I'm a descendant of an immigrant. My father came over here from Italy legally. He did everything the right way, the way the government asked him to do. He taught his children to love this country, to work hard, do things the right way. So I would never, ever be anti-immigration. However, I want it done the right way. We have to be a country that follows the rule of law. When we lose that, we're in trouble. That's why sanctuary cities just don't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. We can't have places in the United States that's free from having to follow our laws. Every place in this country, every person should be following our laws. So we got to get rid of the sanctuary cities to start with. We've got to secure those borders. That's not being mean-spirited. We want to protect the people on the inside. That's our number one duty before we just start letting folks in. I think that there has to be a very strict, systematic way of letting people in legally. And I think that when we have a situation like we had there, it would not make sense to just bring them in and let them just go all over the country. If they could have been kept secure, been repatriated, it just makes sense. I'll tell you something else too. You know, Alabama and many states have stood up and said they're not coming, the Syrian refugees, for example, are not coming to our state. Well, it doesn't do any good if 49 states say no, or if 48 states say no. If one state says yes, what's going to happen is no state has a fence around it. So once they come into a state, they then have the ability to get out into all the states. And I think that's something that we have to be prepared for.
That's very good. Well, in closing, again, Larry, I appreciate your time on this because you've enlightened us very much to some of the issues that Congress can do, how it can help our state and everything. So we're very appreciative of that. One last thing I want to dwell on this issue of immigration. How do you feel about? There's been a lot of debate about.
Let me stop you.
Did it click? I heard something.
Yeah, I heard it click. So, well, it's all right. We're just gonna stop this right here.
Just restart it.
Yeah, and all we're gonna do is just.
Did it click?
At the end of the day, we have to have a policy, an immigration policy that makes sense, that gets the immigration thing under control. We've got to show the courage. We can't be worried about if it's politically correct or, our job is to keep people safe. And, when we have a situation where one state says, yeah, come on in, then that's problematic for the rest of the states because there's not a fence around it. And people will come into that state, the immigrants will, the Syrian refugees. Why don't we make a safe haven for them in their own country? Why don't we, no-fly zone, keep them in their own country, keep them safe, and go in there and take care of business. Let's defeat the folks that are running them out of their country. We can do it because I guarantee you, Germany, France, all those places that have taken refugees are now regretting it. And I bet you they would be a lot more willing if we said, let's send them back to the safe haven. Give us 10,000 soldiers. You give us 10,000 soldiers. You give us 10,000. We'll put in our 10,000, and we'll go over there and defeat them once and for all and leave them in their country. It's important. I get so angry because I work with a lot of military, a lot of veterans. There's a whole bunch of them homeless near Fort Benning, Georgia. And what bothers me about it is we've gone to Washington, D.C. and asked for help on many occasions. We've been told on numerous occasions, there's no money. There's no money. Then all of a sudden, that same administration that told us there's no money announces that if we take in these couple of 100,000 refugees, we found $2 billion that we're going to put toward it, and we're going to make sure that they're fed and kept safe and give them all these entitlements that our citizens are getting. At the same time, our soldiers are still sleeping in freezing cold weather on concrete benches. That doesn't make sense. What we've got to have are congressmen that go up there to Washington, D.C., and a president that instills some good common sense practices that says we're not going to do something if it just doesn't make sense. Okay, well, we will no longer be called the land of the free. You know what? I'm so tired of hearing about that. We're not the ones wanting to get into other countries. Everybody still wants to get into this country. They know we have the greatest country on earth. But we're not going to be the greatest country on earth if we continue to allow everybody in with no kind of restrictions, and we put everybody in jeopardy. We will then become that country that nobody will want to come to because it's going to be too dangerous to do so.
Absolutely. And I think that's so true, Larry, is that we've got, just like our own workforce, we have to educate the workforce to the needs of the state and our region. It's the same thing with our immigrant population. We have to have people that come here that bring skill sets
Correct.
That can be helpful to the United States. Instead of this idea that if they're born here, what frustrates me is we see illegal alien coming here, marrying someone, have children, and then that's how they establish their identity as legal citizens.
Well, and here's the thing that bothers me. I don't typically see immigrants come here and then just suck off the government. What we got going today is our own natural born citizens here that have learned that I don't have to work, I don't have to contribute to society, and the government will take care of me.
Right.
We don't put any limits on young 14, 15-year-old girls that are having babies. You can have 10 or 12 of them if you want. Our government's going to keep giving you money to feed them, to take care of them. And little girls are learning that they can have a career doing that. That we can bring in lots of money into our household if we just keep having children. We get lots of food stamps, we get lots of money, we get disability, we get all this stuff. So the government's providing incentive for them not to work, to keep having children out of wedlock, and the government will take care of them. Even the men, the able-bodied men, are learning I can make more money off the government by staying at home and not working. That has to stop. That is so far away from the first colony in Jamestown when Captain John Smith said, if you want to eat, you got to work. That's what it says in the Bible. Well, we've gotten so far away from that. We got to have congressmen that have the courage to stand up and say, we're going to get back to those days when if you don't work, you don't eat. And then I guarantee you, when you have those farmers that say, well, the reason we have to have all these immigrants come in because they'll do the jobs that nobody else will. I promise you, if you hold up that welfare check to that young man and say, you know what, if you want this, show up at Farmer Brown's farm at 6 a.m. You're going to work for 8 hours for 5 days, and when you finish, we're going to hand you this check. I bet you they'll do that work that those farmers say nobody else will do. But they're not going to do it if they stay at home and you give them the check for free.
That's exactly right.
So we've got to make it make sense.
All right. Well, Larry, this has been very enlightening, and I know our listeners with Christian Coalition will be very pleased to see this interview, and it'll be very helpful to them, and we appreciate your time. I think the things that you've talked about, pro-life, pro-marriage, the economy, education, seems like you've have talked about a lot of things that we don't hear much out of Washington. So I'm very appreciative of that, and I appreciate your time to talk with us about your feelings and why you're motivated to run for Congress.